Today, we're chatting with Dr. Wayman Ming Jr. about his new book, Nearer to God. Dr. Ming, can you tell us a little bit about how you came up with the idea of this book?
Thank you, Martin. Great to be with you today, and very excited about the book. Of course, during the COVID craziness, there was so much emphasis placed on social distancing. And as I began to consider that and also ponder the challenges with that, I recognized that there was a greater challenge even than social distancing, which was spiritual distancing. And so the book was birthed out of that idea that we really need to close the gap, draw nearer to God, overcome the spiritual distance in our lives with Him.
Our lives can get very busy, even in a time of COVID. There's things to be done. What are some of the practical ways that a person can move out of the busyness of life to find a way to strengthen their prayer and devotional life and therefore draw nearer to God?
Yeah, that's a great question, great challenge that all of us face. Our schedules are filled with such hectic busyness that we almost have to pencil God in. We almost have to intentionally take appointments with God or develop appointments with God for spiritual formation, implementing the spiritual disciplines in our lives. And so the book is really a how-to book. It really talks about how do we close the gaptivity. I created a term there, gap and activity, and put it together. How do we mind the gaptivity in our lives and overcome the challenges of our schedule? And we do that by being very intentional in spiritual formation.
We commonly hear a lot of reasons as to why somebody wants to draw nearer to God. But I guess in this season, one thing that I've heard a lot of is that people are living in fear. And whether that's because of the headlines or something in their personal lives, how can we effectively find peace?
Yeah, I'm very thankful that we're all on a spiritual journey at unique places, and that God is concerned about each one of us and is willing to meet us where we are. I'm reminded of Mark 6 when the disciples were in the storm. And of course, many of us feel like we're in a storm with all that's happening around us right now. And Jesus came walking to them on the water, and they cried out to him. And actually, the cry was not a cry of faith, but it was a cry of fear. They didn't recognize him. In fact, the scripture says that they may have even thought he was a ghost. And sometimes in the midst of chaotic circumstances, even Christ's followers can struggle with his identity, who he is in the midst of crisis. And even just to cry out, even if it's in fear, Christ will stop. And he didn't pass the disciples by. He actually ended up getting in the boat with them and became a very present help to them at that moment. And I think people who are struggling with fear, they can really count on God showing up in their circumstances, even if they cry out in fear.
I want to introduce you to a fictitious person, although I'm sure that you'll recognize them. They've prayed, they've read their Bible, they show up to church on a regular basis, and somehow they just never feel like they're drawing near to God. What would you say to a person like that?
Yeah, I would look to that individual and say, listen, if you will make the attempt to draw closer to God, the scripture tells us if we draw near to him, he will draw near to us. And in the Old Testament, God said, if you'll seek me with all your heart, then you will find me. And sometimes we get in a kind of a spiritual rut, or we bob along with the obligations or religious duties that we walk through, church attendance, some of these things which are good. But sometimes we just need to do a deeper dive and pursue God. And if we pursue God and seek after him, he promises us that he will draw near to us. And so I would encourage, anyone, if you'll just pursue God, I think he will pursue you in return.
All right, one last and very unimportant question. You're in a parking lot. What store are you going to when we're done here?
Starbucks.
All
Probably
right.
grab a coffee and see if I could talk to somebody about drawing near to him for sure.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for telling us about Nearer to God. I just got my copy, so I'm looking forward to reading it, and I wish you all the success with this new book.
Thank you, Martin. Again, thanks for having me.